The night of July 17th, 2025, began like any other. It was a simple, quiet Thursday. Children were put to bed with stories of friendly stars and a smiling man on the moon. Lovers walked hand in hand under its gentle silver glow. The moon was a constant friend. It was a silent guardian in the vast, dark sky. People trusted it. They wrote poems about its beauty. They looked up at its familiar, pockmarked face and felt a sense of peace. It was a lamp for the lonely and a clock for the lost. Its light was a promise that the sun would return. No one ever thought to fear it. Why would they? It was just the moon. But something was different tonight. A change so small, so subtle, that at first no one could name it. The light it cast seemed heavier somehow. It felt less like a reflection and more like a stare. The shadows it created on the ground were longer and darker than usual. They twisted into strange, unsettling shapes. Dogs barked at the sky for no reason. Cats hid under beds, their fur on end. Old folks felt a strange ache in their bones, a coldness that had nothing to do with the summer air. The world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. The familiar comfort of the moonlight had a new, sharp edge to it. An astronomer in a remote observatory was the first to see it clearly. He was charting the craters, a task he had done 1,000 times. But tonight, the patterns were wrong. The shadows within the sea of tranquility shifted. They did not move with the slow, predictable grace of celestial mechanics. They moved with purpose. They contracted and expanded, like a muscle tensing. He cleaned his lens. He checked his equipment. Everything was working perfectly, but the image remained. The ancient dead rock was stirring. It was like watching a statue slowly turn its head. A cold sweat ran down his back. His heart pounded against his ribs. He tried to rationalize it. An atmospheric distortion, perhaps, a trick of the light. But the feeling of being watched was too strong to ignore. He felt like a small insect under a giant magnifying glass. The feeling spread across the world like a slow, creeping plague. People standing on their balconies, drivers on lonely highways, children awake past their bedtime. They all felt it. They looked up at the big white circle in the sky. It no longer looked like a friendly face. It looked like an eye. A single, enormous, unblinking eye. And for the first time in human history, the world felt a true and profound fear of the night sky. The change was undeniable now. It was not a blink, not in the human sense. It was a shudder. The entire lunar surface seemed to ripple, like the skin of a great beast waking from a long slumber. The dark seas, the Maria, flowed like ink, rearranging themselves into a vast cosmic pupil. The bright highlands became the sclera, the white of the eye, ancient and cold. The great orb in the sky, the subject of songs and dreams, was now looking down. It was focused. It was aware. It was watching every single person on the planet. The man in the moon was gone. In its place was something far older and far less kind. Panic did not erupt in fire and screams. Not at first. It began as a silent, shared terror. People went inside their homes. They locked their doors and drew their curtains tight. They tried to hide from the gaze, but it was impossible. The moonlight seeped through the cracks. It was a cold, intelligent light now. It felt like it could see through walls, through skin, through bone. It saw into their minds. It knew their deepest fears. People turned on every light in their houses, a desperate attempt to fight the overwhelming darkness and the terrible light that came with it. The world became a planet of small, bright cages, each filled with trembling souls. News channels struggled to explain the impossible. Scientists offered theories, but their voices trembled. They spoke of gravitational anomalies and strange solar flares, but their words were hollow. Everyone knew the truth in their hearts. This was not science. This was something else. This was a waking. It was the moment a child realizes the monster under the bed is real. The world's leaders held emergency meetings, but what could they do? How do you fight a stare? How do you declare war on the moon? There were no weapons for this kind of enemy. There were no defenses against an enemy that was everywhere in the night sky. The horror was in the silence. The moon did not speak. It did not move to strike. It just watched. Its gaze was patient, eternal. It had watched the dinosaurs die. It had watched mountains rise and fall. It had watched humanity take its first steps, build its cities, and dream its small dreams. And now it was awake. It was finally paying attention. The feeling was suffocating. It was the feeling of being utterly insignificant, a tiny speck of dust on a fragile blue marble. noticed at last by a God that did not love. The silence was its greatest weapon, a constant crushing pressure on the soul of mankind. Days turned into a new, dreadful routine. The sun offered a brief escape. During the day, people tried to pretend things were normal. They went to work. They bought groceries. They spoke in hushed tones, avoiding each other's eyes. But the relief was temporary. Everyone knew the night would come again. They knew the watcher was still there, just hidden by the blue of the sky. The terror was a constant hum beneath the surface of everyday life. Sunlight felt like a temporary truce, a brief moment to breathe before the siege began again. The world had been split into two distinct periods, the brief, anxious safety of the day and the long, petrifying horror of the night. When dusk fell, a collective dread descended upon the planet. The beautiful colors of sunset were no longer a comfort. They were a warning. They were the curtain rising on a nightly performance of cosmic terror. Streets emptied. Cities became ghost towns. No one dared to be outside when the eye opened. The night was no longer a time for rest or for fun. It was a time for hiding. It was a time for prayer, though no one was sure what to pray to. The old gods seemed small and powerless compared to the living giant in their sky. The world was united, not by hope or by progress, but by a shared primal fear. Children were the most affected. Their innocent view of the universe was shattered. They had nightmares of a giant eye chasing them through an endless darkness. They drew pictures of a cracked and weeping moon. They refused to sleep in rooms with windows. Parents tried to comfort them, but they had no comfort to give. How can you tell your child not to be afraid of the monster when you are just as terrified? The bedtime stories changed. The man on the moon was replaced with the watcher in the sky, a silent boogeyman for an entire generation. An ancient innocence was lost forever, stolen by that cold lunar stare. The world's great religions and philosophies fractured under the strain. Some proclaimed it was the end of days, a divine judgment. Cults emerged, worshipping the moon as a new, terrible god. They held ceremonies under its gaze, offering prayers to the silent entity. Others insisted it was a natural phenomenon, a misunderstanding, but no explanation could soothe the deep instinctual fear. The simple act of looking up at night, once a source of wonder and inspiration, was now an act of courage. Humanity had become a race of prisoners on its own planet, forever watched by its jailer. The sky was no longer a symbol of freedom, but the wall of a cage. And so the world did not end. It simply changed. The old world, the one that existed before the night of July 17th, was gone. A new age had begun, the age of the Watcher. Humanity continued its existence, but it was a lesser, quieter existence. It was the life of a mouse that knows the hawk is always circling overhead. Ambition dwindled. Why reach for the stars when you know what is waiting there? The grand dreams of space exploration, of colonizing other worlds, died. The sky was no longer a frontier to be conquered. It was a territory belonging to something else, something ancient and awake. We were no longer explorers. We were just inhabitants. Society reorganized itself around the fear. Architecture changed. New buildings were designed with fewer windows or with heavy automated shutters that closed at sunset. Cities were built with covered walkways, allowing people to move from place to place without ever being exposed to the night sky. Life became more subterranean, more inward-looking. The arts reflected the new reality. Music became more somber. Paintings depicted vast empty landscapes under the gaze of a single, terrifying eye. Stories were no longer about heroes who conquer evil, but about people who learn to endure it. Hope was a rare and precious commodity. The moon itself remained a constant, silent presence. It never moved from its path. It never looked away. Its motives remained a complete mystery, which was the purest form of horror. Was it angry? Was it curious? Was it hungry? No one knew. The lack of answers was a form of psychological torture on a global scale. People studied its every subtle ripple, its every shift in light, searching for meaning, for a sign of its intent. But it offered nothing. It simply was. It was a mountain that could see, a god with no name and no scripture, a truth that could not be reasoned with or fought against. Humanity learned to live with the fear. It became a part of them, like the air they breathed. They learned not to look up. They taught their children not to look up. The night sky, once a source of infinite wonder, became the ultimate taboo. The stars, once guides and inspirations, were now just the court of a terrible silent king. We were small. We were fragile. We were seen. and we knew with a certainty that chilled us to our very souls that we would never, ever be alone again. The moon was awake, and the universe was no longer our own.